Welcome, warriors. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Christen Christian. She too has experienced multiple traumas that led her to hold on tight to control whatever she could control. Grab a tissue and learn how using control as a coping mechanism wasn't the best option. Let's rock. Does your past haunt you? Maybe you're in a storm that feels like it will never end. Are you fighting a battle that's rendering you hopeless? Maybe you feel like you're fighting alone, but your battle was not meant to be a solo endeavor. You were meant to be a warrior among warriors. My name is Heather, and I grew up thinking my battles were nobody's business until I found myself in an abusive marriage and felt cut off from all avenues of help. In this podcast, you will hear warriors' words. They will tell you of their battles, both won and lost, their journeys, and their lessons learned along the way. But we don't stop there. These warriors will share how they have applied those lessons to go from warrior to survivor to thriver. Whether it's an abusive marriage, illness, mental health crisis, or any number of traumas this world dishes out, these warriors will use their words to help you find the beauty in your broken, move beyond your battles, and become the thriver God created you to be. Pick up your sword or boxing gloves and join the battle. Your words are powerful, my friends. Make them warrior words. Welcome back to the Warrior Words podcast. Today, Christen bravely shares how one trauma after another, in addition to her birth order, led her to clinging to whatever she could to control her life. Just wait until you hear her story about college. Christen Christian, JD, is a Christ follower, wife, boy mom, and certified essential oil specialist. She is passionate about educating women about natural alternatives for health and wellness. As the host of the Natural Wellness for Christian Moms podcast, she offers encouragement and practical steps to helping Christian women manage the stressors of motherhood naturally. Having lived through various traumatic events, the Lord has graciously redeemed those experiences to allow Christen to connect with and help others process emotions and stressful situations using scripture and essential oils. She offers one-to-one coaching to help manage in the moment the stress that motherhood brings. But before jumping in, here's a review from Claiming Simplicity. So much encouragement. I love the encouragement in this podcast. Cancer Club was close to home. Thanks for sharing. Monica of Claiming Simplicity. Monica, while I am sorry to hear that episode 3, Cancer Club, was close to home for you, I am grateful that you heard encouragement. Thank you for taking the time to leave your review. I truly appreciate you. Would you like me to read your review on an upcoming episode? Please go to Apple Podcasts and leave a review for the show. Your comments and star ratings help people find the Warrior Words podcast. It only takes a few minutes of your time, and it would help so much. Become a Warrior Words insider for all the latest news at subscribepage.io/pearls of wisdom. And as always, that link will be in the show notes. Now, on to the show. Hey, everyone. As you heard in the intro, it is my pleasure to have Christen Christian here with us today. Welcome to Warrior Words, Christen.
Thank you so much for having me today, Heather. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate you giving your time to be here. So I was looking at your podcast because you have a podcast called the Natural Wellness for Christian Moms. There we go.
Yes.
And I was noticing there was a lot of themes of like stress and anxiety that seem to have popped up in your marriage. But I also understand that that's probably not where they started. Can you share with our listeners some of the precipitating factors to this stress and anxiety?
Yes. So, as we know, as Christians, we live in a fallen world full of consequences of sin, whether that be our own personal sin or the sin of other individuals. And growing up, I was definitely not a stranger to trauma, to just different incidents. And so this last year, especially the last couple of years, my husband and I have been married for over 10 years. And for the first few years, we were finishing up school, having babies, moving cities. And so we were very much distracted from underlying baggage, if you will, that we had brought into our marriage. And this baggage did not start when we got married. It was something that we had both brought from our childhoods and just our experiences before we had met each other. And it wasn't until we had sat down together in counseling that I was starting to connect the dots between the problems we were having in our marriages, I should say marriage, just one. and the connection to the trauma that I had experienced growing up and even as just as a young adult. So I grew up in a household where depression is a kind of a genetic disposition for us. And unfortunately, my father suffered pretty heavily from it. And I knew my father loved me growing up, but he was very reserved to himself often of the times. And so I don't know that I ever heard often the words, I love you. I think maybe less than 5 times that I could count. And it's not that he didn't love me, it just wasn't spoken. I'm the 5th out of 6 kids, so there were a lot of us.
Yes.
And being 5th out of 6, if you wanted to be heard, you had to be vocal. You had to make yourself known, which is probably why I like to talk a lot. And so it's very important to me that my voice is heard. And so going along, I always kind of paved my own way. My mother would always tell me, oh, you're very different from your siblings. You're very outgoing. You're very self-motivated. God has prepared you for something big. And so growing up, I'm thinking, oh, yeah, big things, like big successes. That's how I made myself known, was through my success. If I achieved something great, then I got attention. And so I loved being successful in that way. And unfortunately, there was a lot kind of behind the scenes just in terms of mental health. And my 2 oldest brothers suffered very significantly from mental health, and they had a lot of physical. In fact, my second oldest was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis at 19, which is very early to have that onset. And then that combined with just some other factors, in addition to kind of the mental health disposition, he ended up taking his own life in 2004, summer of 2004, 4 days before his birthday. And I remember, I can vividly picture in my mind when my parents woke me up to tell me about that. And at the time, I grew up knowing Jesus. I went to parochial Catholic school. I had a relationship with Christ. When I was in the 4th grade, my mom started reading the Left Behind books. And I remember thinking, God, I don't want to be left behind. So I had a relationship with God. I didn't quite, there was more to understand about that relationship with God that I wasn't aware of. And it's beautiful now to look back and see how God has brought that to circle and to fruition. But so I had to process and experience the death of my first brother by suicide in 2004. And it was right before I was getting ready to start high school. And he also had a family, wife and kids. And that was a really hard time. It was hard to grasp, hard to think about. And even at that particular age, even hard to process the complexities behind, the mental health and the trauma and that. So that then combined with also just the reclusiveness of drawing away, that was really more the reaction that I had gotten from my father. And again, this is not a bashing session against my dad. I love him dearly. We have a great relationship now, but it did have an effect on my marriage and my communication with my own husband, and how I responded to being triggered in my marriage, not knowing I was triggered. And so when I was in college, I had the unfortunate experience of being victim to a sexual assault. And it wasn't your I don't want to say stereotypical type, because in my mind, the sexual assault meant lots of like physical abuse and just all kinds of involvement, whereas mine was a more subtle date situation
Mhm.
And so for the longest time, I even questioned, well, did mine even really count? So I was suffering all of the mental effects of having been assaulted, but questioning whether or not I was even worthy to feel them.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah.
it just compounded over and over again. And so I experienced that, and that the life that I lived right after that was definitely a reflection of that particular experience. I clung to the need to have a significant other, to have a boyfriend, and even to those guys that I did date. It was probably an unhealthy attachment because of what I hadn't received growing up,
Right.
from that father figure, and so it. I don't know, because I wasn't sure if what I had experienced really counted. I just kind of shoved it down, and I did. I went to the hospital. I had a kit done. They offered me to speak with someone who could assist me, an advocate. But I at that time, I'm like, well, I don't even know if this really counts. Does it really count? There's probably some denial there, some other
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
some shock going on for sure. And so I lived the next, goodness, decade pushing it down, pushing it away, and it just coming back. And so I actually met my husband 3 years later after the assault, and in that time, I remember recognizing the Lord was gracious, that He just came right in and He just grabbed my heart, and He was like, "Christen, why are you looking for love, for peace, for comfort anywhere but me?
Wow.
Why not me?" And I didn't understand it. But so he used my own experience to lead me right back to him. In fact, it was through a guy that I was dating, that I probably didn't have a great attachment with, that he was going to church, and he led me back to church. And while he ended up falling off for other various reasons, I stayed, and the gospel was shared with me again. It's not that I'd never heard the gospel, but it wasn't presented in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And the Lord hadn't turned my heart to flesh yet. And so when that gospel was shared with me, the concept of grace, I had never understood that. The concept of grace just didn't resonate, right? If I just did enough, if I went to the right church at the right times and spoke to the right people and said the right prayers, then I should be fine. But understanding that God would meet me right in my suffering, right in my sin, right in my trauma, and He would work to heal me. And I had no idea what that healing would look like in my life. So my husband and I met in 2011, I think 2011. And I was actually getting ready to, I graduated undergraduate early, and I was getting ready to start law school. Again, there's an air of control there. There's like a control theme if you're not catching here, right? Yeah. I wanted to be able to control my financial situation. I wanted to be able to feel control and empowered through my job, through what I was going to do. And so the summer before law school, we started dating. We ended up getting married after my first year of law school. I should really write a book, like all these things you shouldn't do while you're in law school. We got married. We built a house. We got dogs, just all of these things. And so I remember the first time that the trauma from my assault really started affecting me was in our marriage, because I had all kinds of guilt and shame, not just from the assault, but even just the premarital sin that I had been engaged in before. Was this guilt and this shame was just piled on, that sex is something beautiful, that yes, God created it to be beautiful. It's a covenant between a husband and a wife, and the covenant is so significant in terms of its meaning and its security. And I feel like if it were presented to me in that way, I would have made different decisions, but nonetheless, the Lord has used it for His glory and for His good. And so my husband and I, really struggled a lot in our marriage in that different way. And we would make a little bit of progress, and we would shove it back down because we had something new and shiny to look forward to: building a house, finishing law school, him graduating, our first child. Oh, another dog. Oh, let's move cities. Hey, new job. Hey, and so we finally have been where we're at now for It's almost 7 years. Okay, this is the longest we've been in one area, and there was nowhere to run. There was nowhere to hide, nothing to unstuff what we had.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, in 2020, the fall of 2020, my other brother had been suffering from major clinical depression as well, and poetically took his own life in the same way that my first brother. And I know that he also suffered from guilt and some other things that he had kept to himself that he didn't necessarily share with others. And I can only imagine, he has a family, my sister-in-laws, my nieces and nephews, same kind of situation. And at this point, I'm an adult. I'm
right.
almost in my 30s. I'm in my 30s at this point, and I'm seeing it from a completely different view, because now I'm married and I have children, and it just really kind of compounded. And so what I was finding is that in my marriage specifically, there would be instances where I would try to communicate with my husband, and when what I was saying wasn't heard, it triggered me.
Yes.
Because in the assault, my words didn't matter. Right. Saying no didn't matter. Me, putting up resistance, even though I didn't physically fight, my words didn't matter. And so anytime my husband would respond in a way that I didn't feel like I was being heard, I was triggered, immediately triggered. And I would either shut down and recluse, like my dad, or I would speak out, because that's what I knew how to do when you're number 5 out of 6.
Yes.
And speaking out was also often speaking at my husband, not necessarily in a kind way. And he in turn also had some childhood trauma that being spoken at an elevated tone by a female triggered him. So we were both triggered.
What a dynamic, right?
Yeah. I remember when we sat down with our counselor, she had us do interviews beforehand, and she goes, "Man, so I'm really curious as to how you guys have managed conflict for the last 10 years, because both your backgrounds really create an interesting combination." And so the assault was one, my father kind of retreating. So my husband's response oftentimes was to shut down and retreat. And that to me triggered me then feeling like abandonment.
Right.
From other traumas. And then with my brothers having taken their own lives, it was, well, what could I have done differently? And then it makes me hypersensitive and hyper aware, even in my own marriage, and even with my own children, about what am I able to do to prevent this? And I know that I can't predict the future and I can't prevent things, but one thing I do know is that knowing the love of Jesus and putting your hope and trust in him is going to help when the devil comes at you with those lies about the world, about what you're doing isn't good enough, about there is no hope, because he wants you to see that. He doesn't want you to see the hope and the ability that God can redeem each and every situation for his glory and for your good, as you fix your eyes on him.
Right. So. The situation doesn't matter in that regard, because it doesn't matter whether it was done to you, whether you chose it. There is hope and there is redemption. And I think where would we be without it? Where would we be? Where would we be? So, yes. Okay. Well, you shared with us quite a bit, and quite a bit of, I think, different traumas. Even the two losses of life happened in different ways, and they happened in different points of your life. And when you had differing abilities, I guess, to handle both. And so I wonder if you could look back on those two, or even the assault in general, and were there places or points in any of those situations where you could feel maybe the tide turning? Did it happen like shortly after, or maybe it was because you said you stuffed some of that down? None of that happened until these counseling sessions, where you felt like you we're turning from just constantly battling and or stuffing to, on the other side, maybe to surviving a little bit more.
I honestly don't think that I felt like I was thriving and free until I took it to counseling and I brought it all to the light. I had to bring everything into the light, every single thing, from my relationship with my father to the guilt and the shame that I felt about my first brother, and the connection to him. He was the male doppelganger of myself, like in the line of six. I look like him and he looked like me the most. Our personalities are very similar. And I look at my oldest son, who very much has his structure. He's got to be a big guy. I had to bring it to the light. And so there would be, the Lord was gracious enough to allow me to heal in small ways. And I think he allowed that because there was some effort on my part, but I can't say that it was all me. So when my first brother passed, I was very heavy into sports. I mean, I played multiple sports year round. I played back-to-back sports in high school with additional travel sports on top of that. And I mean, I can remember going from my club soccer practice and changing in the car into tights and leotard to go to my ballet class.
Oh, wow. So, very different. Yes.
It was, that takes some skill to do. I don't know that I could do that now, but moving car and putting on the tights and a leotard from soccer, shin guards and cleats. Right. So I think I just always kept myself busy. Even when I got into college, I was in multiple clubs, president of everything you could think of. I had a very big sense of self-righteousness and justice, kind of in that point of, well, I'm going to do what I can do. And the Lord had to humble me. Oh, he had to humble me. Wow, so my way of coping was to throw myself into success, to make my own success, control my own destiny, because things were happening that were outside of my control. And one of the biggest humbling points, so let me just express my level of control. When I was an undergraduate, I was going to graduate summa cum laude 4.0, and we had an honors program, and our honors program required this class where we just went, and it was a discussion class. Like there were questions posing theory and like world issues, and you would just give your opinion, and you would write 500-word essays, and then you were fine, but you got graded. And I had gotten really sick with the bird flu. I think it was the bird flu at that time, at the end of a final period, and I got a B-, B+, and it ruined my summa cum laude. So I took it to the tenured professor and said, "This is not right. I asked you what I could do to bring my grade up, and I did it, and you didn't bring my grade up. Well, the only choice you have is to retake the class." And a freshman in college, and I remember that the head of that department looking at me, and she said, "Well, what makes you think that you're going to graduate summa cum laude? You still have all the rest of your college to go. Is this really that big of a deal?" And I looked at her and I said, "You don't know me, and I will." And sure enough, I retook the class, and it had to be with the same professor. Then I joined the Honor Society, became president, and then got it changed to a pass-fail because I thought it was just not right. And then I graduated a year early, summa cum laude, walked across the stage, shook the hand of the professor that had given me that B+, and just smiled. Like that was me. Okay, you want to say that I can't do something? Watch me. And that control is how I coped with all my stress. And then, having the assault right in between there, it was, okay, watch me. I couldn't control the situation there, but I can control the rest of my life. I can control my success moving forward. I'm not going to let it get me down. And so when I took the LSAT to get into law school, the first time I took it, I got barely national average. I have never been barely national average before. Like, oh man, I must have just had a bad day. What's going on? So I took it again. And I maybe scored 3 points higher. And at that point, I remember thinking, all right, I think you're trying to tell me something, God. So I was more open to the idea that, maybe my plan for my life and what God has planned for me isn't quite the same, but I was bound and determined to go to law school, and I did. And I graduated. Sometimes I made the dean list. Sometimes I didn't. My goal was to graduate and be okay with that, not having to be the best. And it wasn't until I could no longer achieve accolades, that the Lord was like, hey, it's still there. You still haven't brought anything to me. You haven't brought it to me to redeem. And when we were in counseling, I ended up doing for our counselor, we did a couple sessions as a couple. And when we identified that I still had all this trauma from the past, we agreed that I would go separately to work on that specific trauma with her. And we did a workbook together, a beautiful workbook. It was a lot of work and it was hard work, but it allowed me to bring everything shamelessly to the light and to have a professional on the other side. God used her to affirm to me that what I experienced was real. It was true, and it was traumatic. And I just needed somebody to affirm what I had gone through, because I had stuffed its reality back for so long that I couldn't even face it, because in my mind, I started to wonder, well, did it happen the way I remembering it happen?
Right. Well, sounds like she was a blessing then. Definitely a blessing for you.
Yes.
Okay. So then you go to this counseling and you're making progress and you're working individually on healing. So where do things stand now? How are you thriving and sharing your life with others?
The Lord is so good. I cannot express it. So after I did the work, right, and I brought everything to the light, my deepest feelings of shame, of guilt, of disgust with my own self, I had to bring that. Like, I felt this way. Mm-hmm. It has redeemed everything. Our marriage is just beautiful. And it makes me want to cry just even thinking about it, because my husband was there for me and helped me heal, supported me in that healing. And so he created that safe space for me. And I just thank God for him and for his willingness to do that, because his job, he's actually a law enforcement officer. So he sees a lot of trauma also in his own regular job.
Right.
And even in my, I do a little bit of work in the office. I work some in juvenile court dealing with children in need of services cases and other issues and things of that sort too. So we both kind of experience it a lot in and of ourselves, but for him to have that patience. And so I don't have that same shame and that same guilt. And I can't even explain the weight that is just lifted off my entire being, and the way that I even approach situations. It's not that I don't ever get triggered anymore, but I know now that my husband and I are on the same team, and that he is open and he is willing to hear me. And I'm no longer insecure about his relationship to mine, because I know that we're on the same page and being able to make that connection. And I've been able to even take some of the concepts and the thoughts that I learned in my own counseling and have conversations with my father. And I found out that his childhood was way more traumatic than mine. Well, I'm not that you can compare one trauma to another, right?
Right.
But he definitely experienced a lot of trauma. And he's even said things like, he's watched my husband interact with our boys, and he said things like, man, nobody ever held me like that when I was a child. Nobody ever, experienced this. And it just, having worked through my own trauma and looking back, I'm realizing that he did the best he knew how.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that he loved me, and I can see that, and I can receive that, and I can own. I know that my father loved me. I have no doubt. He loves me. He loves me. I have a great relationship with my dad. They're one of my boys' favorites, right? But if it wasn't for the love of God and for his redeeming grace, and telling me that I need to show grace to myself and also grace to others around me. So I had to bring it to the light. You have to bring every bit to the light, lay it all down at the feet of Jesus. I mean, people say that, but truly bring it all, because he can't redeem it if you don't bring it.
Exactly. Well, I was going to ask you for some warrior words, and I think you just gave us some.
Oh, there we go.
There you go. Bring it all. Yeah. Because you can't do anything if it's hidden in darkness, or if it's stuffed down deep. You can't do anything. He can't do anything with it.
No.
You can't do anything with it. You tried with all your different ways of controlling and stuffing, and you proved to yourself, and maybe he proved to you that that's not the way to do it.
Right. Not his. And someone told me God is really early, but he is never late.
No, he's not. No, he's not. He's always right on time.
Yes.
So, okay. So if anybody wants to learn more about what you do, to learn more about the Natural Wellness for Christian Moms podcast, can you tell us a little bit more about that, or where they can come find you?
Absolutely. Yeah. So through my experiences, and even while I was processing my traumas, I found the amazing benefits of essential oils and their ability to help you process through emotions, including traumas. Again, they're not a replacement for the word. They're not a replacement for God and his glory, but they're I call them little mercies, right? They're little helpers. And so in my podcast, I focus on helping women manage stress through scripture and essential oils. And so you can find me on any major podcast platform at Natural Wellness for Christian Moms. I also have a free Facebook community that we support about, and I do offer one-on-one coaching to help women create those sensory routines to help you when you're in the moment, when you're triggered, like I was, how you can use essential oils as a sensory anchor to help you anchor into God's word and anchor into his truth rather than focusing on your emotions and the circumstances of the moment.
Awesome. Okay. And we'll get those links in the show notes so that people can come find you.
Perfect.
So, wonderful. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Christen, excuse me.
That happens often.
Yes.
And I did it to myself. It's my married name.
Well, I appreciate you, Christen, and I appreciate the time and the stories that you shared with our listeners today.
Thank you so much for having me today, Heather. I appreciate it as well.
Thank you. All right. Christen's experiences might make you want to question why she didn't just give up. And while I'm reasonably certain she asked why at least once during her struggles, if she had given up, she would never have learned the valuable lessons she did. She learned that she couldn't and shouldn't control everything. Her brother's suicides, her father's past, and her husband's history were all circumstances she could not control. Which leads me to the second lesson. Christen learned that she had to bring all of it, every single thing, out of the dark and into the light. She couldn't stuff it all or lock it in a closet somewhere. Attempting to do that allows us to spiral out of control, the exact opposite of what she was trying to do. So what are you trying to control in your own life? Could it be something God wants you to bring out into the light and lay at his feet? Something to think about this week. See you next time. Until we meet again, armor up, fight the good fight, seek beauty, and make your words warrior words. God bless.